Chemistry at the University of Minnesota, and today we're gonna just have more of like a conversation about, applying to chemistry PhD programs, what to expect, what to do. And first, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about myself, in case, you want to talk offline about a couple of things. I've worn a lot of hats during my time at the University of Minnesota. One of my, I would say, bigger hats that I've been very proud of is serving as the University of Minnesota's chapter president for the Society for the Advancement of Chicano, Hispanic, and Native Americans in Science or STEM, or SACNAS. I've also been involved in a wide variety of different committees and organizations. Something I care really deeply about is outreach and community engagement. And so I have spent a lot of my time in graduate school trying to bring science to those who may not have access to it in their own communities. And I also was introduced to Científico Latino a couple years ago and have served as a graduate student mentor in the Graduate Student Mentor Initiative program. And so just, fun things that I have been lucky to be a part of, to be completely honest. But to give a little bit of, those are more of like the professional hats, but a little bit more about just me in general. I grew up in North Carolina, in Charlotte. I went to American University in Washington, D.C. I thought I was going to be an international relations major. Lo and behold, I was not. And I decided to major in chemistry pretty late. So I spent a lot of time trying to catch up to take classes that were for my major. Once I knew that I really wanted to do research, I did an REU in the electrical and computer engineering department at Duke University. I graduated from American in 2016. I started my program at the University of Minnesota in 2016 as well, got my master's along the way, and if all goes well, finishing this November. But, and my research here at Minnesota is focused on detecting various types of food contaminants with polymers and surface enhanced Raman. But beyond that, I am first generation Latinx. I grew up in a low income household. Both my parents immigrated from Durango, Mexico in the late 80s, and they only finished 6th grade and 9th grade. And so really wanted just a completely different life for their kids. In that photo, it's my parents on either side, and I have 2 older sisters. Not pictured in that when I graduated is I have the cutest niece, and she is in school right now, or pre-K, and it's so crazy to see how much she's grown because she was born while I was in grad school. But I think, like a lot of people who have had similar backgrounds as me, is that I had no idea that one day I could be in a doctorate program, that idea was even reachable. More so that I didn't know that I could dream that far. And so, I've learned so much during this journey that a big part of it is really helpful to me to be able to share as much as the things that I've learned during my time. Simply because I wish I would have known some of this information when I was looking at graduate programs or just navigating higher education as a whole. So, knowing that, how do I know a PhD program is right for me? Where do I start? So I think people have this idea that, PhD programs mean that you have to, one day want to teach and be a professor. And that's not really what a PhD program is about. It's also not about, trying to, get a job like right outside. The program is meant for people who have a passion for learning and problem solving. If you're not interested or you're not in that mindset at the time, then a PhD program is not going to be the right fit for you. But if this seems like something that you are passionate about, you should definitely apply. It goes beyond just the science. It's really about learning how to learn and hopefully finding the right program that is your match. And so what kind of research, for where to start, you can start asking yourself questions like, what kind of research are you passionate about? Are you someone who's really into organic total synthesis? I am not. I am so far from an organic chemist. Or maybe you're really interested in materials chemistry or nanotechnology or chemical biology. I mean, these are all various types of fields that you can be incredibly passionate about. And once you sort of pinpoint the kinds of things that you're interested in, you don't necessarily have to be interested in one specific, division or type of chemistry. You can really just start by looking at random research groups and making note of what kinds of things excite you. And so that might be just picking a random university and being like, I've heard good things about the state of Colorado. Let me go see what's going on there. And, maybe reading through some of the research and saying, what, that sounds so cool. And once you start pinpointing, those sorts of ideas, then you can move on to looking at other programs and being excited by other types of research that is going on all over the world, really. And so we're going to go through the overall process and then move towards sort of getting through that process. And so step one is the GRE. So for those who or maybe have been studying for the GRE, maybe haven't even taken the GRE, there's still plenty of time. I like to think of the GRE as just the adult SAT, if that's something that you're familiar with in the US. It's just like an adult problem-solving test. However, a lot of chemistry programs are what they're calling GRExiting. So if you're familiar with Brexit in the UK, it's that they're removing this GRE exam as a necessity for their applications, because a lot of research has been done about how it is not necessarily a good indicator of how you will do in graduate school, of your application packet as a whole. And so actually, I think that you guys will have access to these slides. And so there are some lists that show certain universities that have done away with the GRE completely, which obviously is less expensive to apply to, right? But the GRE is usually a great place to start thinking about, especially because those exams only have certain days that you can take them. So scheduling that is important. Number two, pick graduate programs you're interested in. That seems like it's like a sort of duh moment, but it's a little bit harder than you would think, because sometimes you're interested in everything and sometimes you're thinking, well, maybe I'm interested in too many things that don't overlap. And so making sure you pick programs that you're interested in is important. And so in doing that, make sure you're interested in at least 2 to 3 professors at that institution. If you were to apply to a school and that professor isn't taking students anymore, then you'd be kind of stuck in what you'd be able to do. And so making sure that that is an option that you could see yourself working for multiple people is very important. Make a list of these programs. 5 to 10 is average. I applied to 12 programs. I do not recommend that. It was expensive and it was tiring. And so making a list of programs and sort of narrowing down where you can see yourself is really important. And so 5 to 10 is a pretty good range. And fee waivers exist. This wasn't something that was necessarily as advertised as it was now. And it was almost like, I almost felt embarrassed to ask when I was applying to schools, because I felt like it put a label on me that I was low income and that my parents were low income and that I was barely, if that, affording college. And so, but now a lot of these waivers are advertised on different graduate program websites, as well as maybe you're really interested in a program and they can use this as a way to recruit you. And so you can say, you can reach out to people like the director of graduate students at that department in that school and say, I'm really interested in applying, but those $95 are pretty expensive. Is there any way that I would qualify for a fee waiver? It is not embarrassing in the least. 3 is asking for 3 letters of recommendation. They should definitely come from professors who know you well. So for example, I worked with 2 professors in undergrad. So those were 2 of my letter writers, as well as I was able to do an REU and she was also one of my letter writers. And so please like make sure that you're asking people who actually know you, who can talk about, how great of a student you are, as opposed to someone who may not know you very well. Letters of rec are very important in your application, and finding good people to write those letters for you will help you overall. 4 is starting to draft your research statement or statement of purpose, depending on how it's named in certain applications, and having friends and professors and whoever you want edit them is totally fine. I asked for as many edits as possible from science people, from non-science people. And I think I overall was able to put together like a compelling story as to why I was interested in graduate school. And I think showing a part of you in that, you're not just someone who's going to go in and do science. I mean, you are, as a researcher, you are a full, complete person, and you're a person first. And so showing that side of you, I think is also a very important piece to finding the right match for graduate school. And then, of course, hitting submit. It is hard to do the first time, but once you click it once, it gets a lot easier to keep clicking it the next time. And then you wait to hear back for interviews, or you are accepted. And then what's really awesome is that usually, if things were a little bit better, usually you're flown out to the university and they basically wine and dine you, and you are what they want. And so they are going to do everything in their power to try to get you to come there. And so you should really enjoy those moments because it feels nice. You've put in all of this work and finally you are at a place that wants you. And so now you have to see if you want them. It's sort of like I like to think of it in like a weird, almost like friendship dating process where it's like, okay, we're both here. I need to learn a lot of things. We're seeing where things go. And then eventually you'll be able to make your decision about where you want to go. So as we touch base, the GRE, very similar to the SAT in terms of standardized testing. It is, I see we have a Q&A. So I am going to go ahead and answer that before we keep, because this is totally a conversation. So this question says, will interviews be virtual, in person, or hybrid in your respective schools? So that's a great question. Usually, I don't even would like to call them interviews usually, because oftentimes some schools will do sort of like a short interview process. Other places will accept you and then fly you out. And so there really isn't anything holding back there. You already have an offer from that school. Because of COVID, I know that some of these visits in the past year-ish have been virtual. They usually are in person. I wouldn't be surprised if they are hybrid, depending on how things go. But I should mention that it is very expensive to try to fly out international students. So they often only do this sort of flying out component where they house you just for a weekend, you meet all these professors, et cetera, for domestic students, I should say. So I think the answer to that right now is it could go either way. Usually you start hearing back from schools in January and February. And so things are still up in the air. And so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe some are virtual and some maybe move to being in person. We have another question. Do you think, this question says, do you think it is worth taking the GRE even if the schools you're looking at are not requiring it? Can it only help your application? That's a great question. And the answer is yes, question mark, but also, the GRE is a pretty expensive test. And so what you can do is you can take it if you want to. Sending out scores is also a cost. If you do amazing on the GRE, then you should, send out those scores, because clearly you are a good test taker. You have a skill that not a lot of people have, and I will include myself in that realm. I am not a very good standardized test taker. But again, If all of the schools that you're looking at don't require the GRE, I personally don't think that it would be worth the cost. I think that there are other things that you can put time and energy to that would make your application exciting that the GRE doesn't necessarily give. But if you have taken it, or if you were already planning on taking it and you do exceptionally well, there's no problem sending those scores in, but it is a cost to actually send those scores. So that is something to keep in mind. I think when I did it, it was $27 per school. So if you apply to, 10 schools, that's $270 right there. So just something to keep in mind. Ooh, that's a great question. There's a question in the chat. Is age a limiting factor in pursuit of a PhD? No, it is not. You can get a PhD at any time in your life. I know people in my program, and I mean, me included, that I went right out of undergrad. There are plenty of people who go after working in industry for 5 years, people who have started their lives, had kids, and then are like, you know what, grad school seems like a cool idea, and have started grad school. I mean, you can really start grad school at any moment in your life. You just have to, I think, be prepared that, you're going back to school if that's something that you haven't necessarily been in the like almost mentality for many years. And so, but I don't think that age is a limiting factor, nor should it be, because age doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be good or bad at science, right? Like it's more how invested are you in a program to like teach yourself how to learn and be passionate about that. Yeah, okay. So continuing on, for those who haven't taken the GRE and are a little less familiar with it, the GRE is taken at a computer, and so you get your results immediately, except for the writing score. So basically, you take the whole test, and then you submit everything, and you get your scores in the second that you finish. The writing portion does take like 2 weeks or 3 weeks to get the full score for. Schools care in chemistry, I should, in quotation marks, I'm using quotation marks, care most about the math score, because it's most in parallel with what we do. But it's not the most important part of your application. It is really not. But the GEM Fellowship, which is a fellowship that all of you all should look into regardless of the GRE or anything, is an incredible fellowship made for underrepresented groups. And if you apply, there are 2 parts to the application of the GEM Fellowship. And in the first part, if you just submit it by a certain time, I think it's usually due sometime in October, they will give you half off fee waivers for the GRE, which is almost impossible. And they will put your name in sort of like a recruitment for other universities in the fields that you're interested in. So in chemistry, or if you're interested in chemical engineering or whatever that may be. And it's used as a way to recruit students, specifically underrepresented students, to those institutions. And in those ways, you can easily have access to fee waivers, to the director of graduate studies for those institutions, et cetera. And so GEM Fellowship is something everyone here and everyone watching should really look into. And so if you end up actually deciding to take the GRE, you've never taken it, I suggest to buy prep books that have an online practice test component. There are some. Those that have that online practice test component are almost exactly like what the test is on your computer when you take it. And so I highly suggest, even if you are already scheduled to take it, looking into those online practice test prep books, because they are so like exactly like the test, basically. Have a couple more questions. Is there an advantage to taking the chemistry GRE subject test and reporting the score to programs I'm applying to? Great question. The chemistry GRE is often taken more so by international students applying to schools in the US, because it is a way to set them apart from other international students applying. Usually, and I'm not saying this in any kind of way, but usually actually domestic students in the US get a lower score on the chemistry GRE than international students. And that is because they have been studying for this exam and for like specifically for it for a long time. And the chemistry GRE was actually removed in a lot of applications way before the GRE was because of how low of a score domestic students were getting. So if you don't have to take the chemistry GRE subject test, I don't think that you should. If you have to take it for the program that you're applying to, and that's totally fine to send that to other programs that you're applying to if you do well. But just overall, a lot of institutions have done away with the chemistry GRE simply because students have scored pretty low on it. Me included, I should say. I took it for like one school and I did terrible, like really bad. So don't think of anything because of it. So I have a couple more things in the chat. Oh, I love this. Oh, it's Científico Latino. Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica. Okay, question in the chat, and then we can move on to the next part. So, hi, Becky. Thank you for sharing your background during the beginning. Oh, thank you. Since I'm close to finishing, I come from a similar socioeconomic family background, so I know it's hard to be first to navigate science on your own. What would be your advice to people applying / just starting their grad school journeys? Thank you. Thank you very much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I would say finding mentors and people to advocate for you is the most important part of navigating grad school. And that can be hard if you don't have mentors or people to talk to. Luckily, I hope that a lot of you guys have taken advantage of the GSMI initiative that Científico Latino has. But it really pays off to have someone in your court. And what I mean by that is that, and I can talk a little bit more when we talk about letter writers, but it's nice to have someone in the background who, I mean, you can say everything that you want in some of these applications. Some of the applications even say things like, were there ever a moment in which, maybe you have a bad grade in a class or, whatever that may be. And you can say these things of like, yeah, I was going through a tough time, or like, I had to work, X amount of hours, I had no money. But having maybe even a letter writer say, I saw them put in the work and they had everything working against them is a really important part to, I think, grad school applications, especially from people coming from a more marginalized background. I also think that honestly, being yourself in these applications is really important too. You'll quickly notice that it's more than just applying to a grad school and getting in. It's really a matching part. Like, do you match at this program, at this institution? And it could be that maybe you don't. And that is okay. It just means that you are meant to do your work or thrive in another place. And so I can touch base a little bit about that on thinking about rejections and why that may be. But I think my advice is really trying to find as many people to have to help you, whether that be professors, whether that be graduate students, whether that be mentors in other places like these, simply because doing it alone and stumbling is a lot harder than doing it with someone doing it with someone and potentially stumbling. But I can definitely touch base on a couple of those things. So I'll keep this question up so I don't forget, but thank you for asking that. Okay, picking schools to apply to. So there are a couple things that people care about. One, research, right? I mean, you're going to a place for, X amount of years. You want to make sure that the research is interesting and that you could see yourself working in multiple places. Some projects, maybe you look online and you find, oh my gosh, this is the project for me. I want to work for this person. This is the project that I was called to do. I'm so excited. And it might be that maybe when you get there, that project ended. You'll find out quick enough that professors tend to not update their website very often. And so it might be that, the project that you were super excited about may be over there. And so you have to be sure to be flexible, right? A lot of people will argue about what's more important, research or a professor, like finding a professor you mesh with. And at the end of the day, as long as it's in the realm that you're interested in, like whatever research you're interested in, maybe you're super interested in protein synthesis. I don't know anything about protein synthesis, but maybe that's all that you've ever wanted to do. And you go and you see that the professor who does protein synthesis doesn't really seem like is going to be a good match. They're super hands-off and you're more of a person that's hands-on, and maybe it's not going to be the best fit. And so it's really important to make sure that you're flexible in that sense, that, maybe you can go work on another project with a professor that you really do mesh with well. The other thing is location. For me personally, this was not very important, but for other people, it really is. And so some people may have restraints or constraints due to family. Maybe they're taking care of family. Maybe you have kids. And so be sure to look in places that work best for you. Like if you can only be on the East Coast, like only look on the East Coast. That's okay. I didn't have any constraints, and that worked out for me. And so I applied all over the US. The third thing is emailing professors. Like you can cold email anyone you want. And so maybe you've made a list of some of the professors you're interested in at some of these institutions. You can email them. You can say, hey, like I'm an undergrad at this school and I'm majoring in chemistry. I'm interested in applying to grad school and I came across the research and I find it really interesting. Would you have any time to chat? And a lot of professors will be like, yeah, of course, I'd love to talk about my science and I would love to talk about like, whatever. And it definitely like puts a name to a face, and you can start talking about current projects that they have. You can even mention them when you start applying this stuff. Like you can say like in your application, I talked to Professor so-and-so about their research, and professors like tend to remember some of these connections. The other thing that can happen is maybe you send emails to like 6 professors and only 2 respond. That's okay too. Sometimes emails get lost in professors' inboxes. Sometimes they don't recognize it and they may accidentally delete it. But if that happens, maybe you didn't get an email from a professor that you're super excited about, you can totally email the grad students. Grad students are always on their email and are more than happy to talk about science or talk about their advisor or whatever need be. And so we're totally up to be bothered, I should say. And that might be maybe, in the age of Zoom, having a Zoom chat, having a phone call, having a couple email exchanges, maybe saying, hey, these are a couple of relevant papers that you might be interested in. Let me know if this is something you want to discuss. Like all of those are totally fine. I emailed a lot of professors and I think it really helped me. I was really afraid I wouldn't get into grad school. And so having that option of starting a conversation and maybe even continuing it later, I think is really nice. Other things, I was very, again, I was very scared I wasn't going to get into grad school. And I'll touch a little bit on that as to why, but there was a lot of things that I was considering in terms of things that were important to me. So I'm a planner. So I made a ginormous Google spreadsheet. I'm not saying you have to do this, but I made a ginormous Google spreadsheet with all the schools I was interested in. And then I would put the cost of living in the city that it was in versus, what the stipend is at that place. I was interested in how many minorities do they accept at the institution versus in the department. How many women or self-identifying women, non-binary folks were accepted into the institution and felt, were there organizations that supported them. All of these demographics, weather, that sounds pretty silly, but I was like, in this place, it just rains every day, and these were just things that I just wanted to know. And so you can totally, make comparisons and I also put how much did it cost to apply there? Did they require a GRE? What are their GPA requirements? Did they have any? Is there something on their website that said that you super need to include and so I know Científico Latino has multiple talks on picking schools to apply to, which you guys should definitely take advantage of. Again, it's linked in these slides just in case. But for sure, you can, whatever is most important to you, in addition to research, right? It's really important to want to go to a place and wake up every day and do science. But, there are other factors, right? Like, are you okay living in a small town? Do you want to live in a big city? Is public transit really important to you? Do you have a car? Do you need a car? And these are all things just to like keep thinking about or sort of keep in mind in the back of your head as to when you're picking schools to apply to. You don't have to know the answers to all those things, but it can help narrow down in those 5 to 10 graduates programs that you end up applying to. Letters of recommendation. So in my personal opinion, and I shouldn't even say it like that. I have served in a lot of different spaces and have been a part of many committees, some of them having to do with recruitment, some of them having to do with retention of underrepresented students. Letters of recommendation are one of the most important parts of your application packet. So like I said, you should have 3 letter writers and let them be people who know you, who can, talk about you in a positive light. Don't pick someone whose class you had, or maybe you worked for a professor who like did not like you. Like that sometimes is the case, and that sucks, but don't ask that person to write you a letter, because it's either going to be a not so great letter, or it's going to be just a letter that's kind of bland. I would say they're going to say very generic things like they're a good student, they got an A in my class, they did X, Y, and Z, they'd be a great student to have your institution. Super, like, okay. You should find people who care about you. So you can ask certain professors to talk about specific events in your letter of recommendation. And this is where I wanted to mention about my scare of not getting into grad school. Yeah, I struggled a lot in undergrad. I had a lot of outside factors, a lot of family outside factors. And then there was a time where I took a class at a different institution, and my professor treated me and another person unfairly due to our race. And that was very frustrating, but took it out on our grade. And I didn't know what else to do at that point. Like I was really pushing myself to be able to get over the hurdle to grad school, but I felt like I wasn't competitive enough compared to other people. And so, I had professors that I talked to about this. And so I would say, what do I do? Like, what do I have this grade, and I can't say, X, Y, and Z. And so they said, don't worry, I will talk about that in your letter. And so they can talk about tough times. They can talk about, maybe you had something really crazy happen to you during your time in undergrad. And it's not something that necessarily you want to talk about in depth, but maybe they can. They can talk about low GPA. They can talk about the fact that you were working jobs and juggling school and research. I worked over 20-ish hours a week in undergrad. More so my senior year of college, when I was applying to programs because I didn't have any money and I needed to apply to grad school, and I was doing it all out of pocket from my own money. So I worked a lot. I picked up extra shifts and I did research, and I didn't get paid to do my research. So I volunteered to do research. Plus I was taking classes, I was applying to grad school, I was applying to fellowships. I mean, I had a lot going on, and my letter writers from my institution touched base on that. Like, they're like, Becky works hard. Like, she, at the time, I almost couldn't see it. I almost didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel, I should say. But I mean, they are here to vouch for you. And Not saying that your voice isn't important, but oftentimes, because this person, whoever your letter writer is usually a professor or someone with a doctorate degree in that field. Some people may even know each other. It's very common in the science community. Um, they like extra believe your application because they're like, wow, this person that I know is vouching for this person's accomplishments and their potential and how much they're willing to put forth to work hard. And even though maybe their grades aren't very strong, like it's very clear that this person I know is saying you need to accept them. They're going to be like a big part of your institution. You're going to regret not taking them. And so make sure that you can find letters that talk about that. And that may seem very big, like you're like, I don't know if my research advisor is gonna, be so heavy about these things. But you can say, when you ask for letters of rec, you can say, here's my CV. I specifically want you to touch base on the fact that, I came and did research for you, even though I was working, many hours. And I want you to mention that because I know that you saw that. It's okay to be honest because you are wanting to get into grad school, and they, if they're writing you a letter of recommendation, should be talking about your potential and what you've accomplished. A fourth letter writer is optional, but it's not really encouraged because by the time you think about your top 3 professors or top 3 people, by the fourth, it almost feels like the comments about you might be a little bit watered down, if that makes sense. Because I think that those 3 people can say great things, and maybe you have a fourth person that's going to be like, they're amazing. But it's typically either not encouraged or some applications only look at 3. Now, if you have a professor that maybe is great, but forgets to upload things, I had a professor like that. Maybe having a fourth one as optional would be nice, because sometimes when you submit applications or things, if one of your letter writers happens to forget to submit something, they'll go to the next letter writer, and that can be a fourth person. All in all, to say, I think that this is one of the most important parts of your application packet, and thinking about who will write those for you is, I think, very, very important. So we have a couple questions. So this question says, I want to consider each person's diversity stats in my decision to apply, but not all of them are transparent about this on the website. It's a lot of money, as I'm learning. How do you go about getting this info? Great question. Some, programs don't talk about it, which one I think sometimes is I wouldn't say red flag, maybe more of like a slightly yellow flag. But it also may be that they've never, maybe they're blinded by the idea that that's something important, or that's something that people like us are looking for. And so you can totally 100% email the director of graduate studies or whoever, the chair of the department, whoever may be, and say, hey, I'm interested in applying to this program. And I would love to know, what sorts of students that you're accepting every year, the demographics, as well as in terms of retention, those same percentages. Are the same amount of people that you're accepting able to graduate with a PhD? Those are questions that you can ask, because as much as you want them to like they should want to give us. There was a big.
Oh, that's mine. Sorry.
I thought it was like something telling me like, Becky, stop talking. But as much as it's like you think that you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do everything in my power to get them to like me. It's a two-way street, and so they should want to be able to give that information out, to be like, oh, of course, like and maybe they say, we've only accepted one person of color in the past 5 years, and then that way, like maybe this isn't the right fit for me. Or maybe, for some people it's like, yeah, no, I don't want to be the first in any of those spaces. And for some people are like, okay, I can do that. I can set, pave ways. That's not your responsibility to do that, I should say. But it really depends on what you're looking for. Everyone's drive and mental health in these programs is different. And so you are totally in your right to ask those questions to the director of graduate studies in chemistry or the chair of the department, whoever is listed on there.
I'm gonna jump in super
Go
fast.
ahead.
I did something that worked out for me in terms of determining diversity status data. Unfortunately, no one really publishes the data, even though I do agree with Becky. Like there is a demand from like people like us who like want to see the data and determining where we want to apply to. What worked out for me is asking the students who are already there, particularly older students. Like if I, especially during like interviews, I would, straight up ask like the other like Latino grad student, like, what has like the cohort been diversifying as time went along? Has it not? Like, what's it like? Um, I would say ask that regardless if they publish their data or not. Because data will tell you one thing, but like lived experiences from like students who are already going through the program, you'll gain a lot of knowledge from that. So that's another way too. Either way is fantastic. Whichever one that you are most comfortable with is great.
100%. I should say 100%. Grad students, I will say, I'll talk about this a little bit later. We have no reason to lie. We have no reason to be like, we like come here. We're so diverse. Everyone's so accepting. And then the second you get there, be like, just kidding. It sucks here. Like we have no reason to lie. And so grad students are actually very honest. They'll tell you, yes, I love this place. It's stumbled in certain spots, but we're working towards a better, no department is perfect, but we're working towards something better. Or some people will say, I think things have been lacking, and that is maybe on the department, maybe on, oversight, maybe there's not a lot of conversation about it. But you can totally reach out to grad students, the DGS chair, anyone. Some people do have stats, but also a lot of places are like, we started monitoring things last year. And so then you're like, oh, okay. But yeah, that's definitely something. Thank you, Jessica. So this is a question in Q&A, how do you bring up asking a professor to talk about a specific event without it being awkward or shameful? Great question. I think when I started applying to things, I was ashamed of me. And I know that now as a person, I'm very, now I should say, I'm very introspective now. But back then I felt like I was constantly in a fight or flight mode. I felt like I went to a very wealthy institution. I was not wealthy, the institution was, it's a private school. And so the people around me had a lot of money. I was in DC, and so I felt like I had to hide these parts of me where my parents were immigrants. They came to the US undocumented. And, my parents didn't, I one time like handed off a check for a significant other I had at the time that their dad was paying their tuition. And I was literally holding a check for like $20,000. And I was like, I have never held anything like this in my life. And so I was very ashamed of those parts of me because I felt like I wasn't allowed to be myself in those spaces, specifically, I should say, in academia. So that was just one part of me that I felt was awkward. I remember having to get a fee waiver for something, and I had to get a form from my institution, and the institution said, we've never had anyone ask us for this. And I was like, I'm the first poor person to ever come into here and ask for this form. And they're like, yeah, we don't know what to fill out. Like, what are we supposed to do with this? And so I felt like I was just constantly trying to hide that part of me. But I think what I've learned from then and up until now, it's been quite some time, I think. It feels like forever ago, is to be honest. I'm not a very, me personally, a very confrontational person. I struggle a lot with being in a room with someone and saying, look, this is something I need to address. I'm going to tell you this part of me. I'm much better at writing it. I've sent in my time very, very long emails about certain things that I need to tell people in high positions so that they can help me. Asking for help is really hard too. If you've spent a lot of your time trying to navigate higher education and other spaces alone for a long time, asking for help seems impossible, because what if someone says no, and then it's embarrassing. But you should ask for help in as many places as you can. Going to this webinar, one, is asking for help, and it's good that you're getting it. And so one way that you can talk to a professor about it is say, I am trusting you to know this information, and I would really appreciate if you could mention it in my letter of recommendation, because I think that it shows the full story about me as a person to apply to this institution. The other thing could be like, hey, I would really love to have this conversation with you, but I don't feel comfortable doing it at this moment, but I do want to tell you these things. I can talk about it with you offline, but these are the things I would like for you to include in this letter, because I'm still having a hard time talking about it, but I know that if it were to come from your side, that maybe you'd be better at phrasing it for my letters, for my application packet. I hope that answers the question. And if there's something a little bit more specific you want me to touch base on, feel free to ask, especially because it's anonymous. I'm gonna take a sip of water. So the question here is there any way to know that your application isn't that competitive / not worth applying money-wise? Okay, that's a hard question. I don't think I can say yes or no without knowing about your application. I do know that there are people who feel, for example, that they didn't get to do any lab work, for example. And maybe they feel like that makes them that they're not as competitive with other applicants. And that's totally fair, because also, like, what if you realize that maybe doing lab work or computational work isn't necessarily what you want to do? And some of those opportunities give you a feel of what those things can be. And so if you don't have access to that, then maybe you don't really know that grad school is what you want to do. And so some people take a year off and see where, where they're at after that. But I think it's a little bit hard to say without knowing full story about the application, if it's not worth applying to money-wise. I will say though, if some of the applications are free and there is no GRE requirement, then technically it should be free for you to apply. The only cost would be your time that you're putting towards making that application. And so yeah, I think that I wouldn't necessarily write it off as not being competitive or not worth applying money-wise, because I think that there are still places that you can apply to just to feel things out. Maybe you only apply to like 3 and you're like, this is all I'm going to apply to. I'm going to see test the water, see where things go. And that way it's not a huge burden on you from a economic standpoint, but also you can sort of see maybe what it's like to apply and give you a sense for if you want to apply in the future. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't answer that the best, but I think it's kind of hard either way. Okay, next question. Ooh, if I can already tell. How did you start to overcome the mentality of being ashamed and hiding part of your identity in school, especially low income surrounded by wealthier classmates? Oh man, I could go on forever. I should say, for one, undergrad was a very different time for me. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I was in this space where I wasn't being my most authentic self. I'm not saying that I was lying in undergrad, but I mean, there's some truth to that too, right? Like that I showed only a piece of myself to people in the spaces that I needed to keep up with, the small academic facade that like I belonged. And that has a lot to do with, imposter syndrome. Obviously, I did belong because I kicked butt and I graduated. And I think it takes a lot of, I don't want to say time, but you have to first get to know yourself. And I don't think I fully knew who I was in undergrad. Not that a lot of people do. But I think the biggest part that changed who I was finding people who would advocate for me. I was very, very lucky to find a PI in grad school who saw herself in me, because we had gone through very similar moments in our life in terms of things to overcome and sort of playing the game of academia. But once I felt like I had people who supported me, it became a lot easier to start letting down these sort of guards that I had put up for a long time. And I started to be more honest with myself. I started to use social media as a platform to do that, to bring a sense of transparency, where I was like, you know what, like I used to be pretty ashamed about the fact that I had no money, or that, you know, I love my parents with my whole heart, but you know, my mom has a cleaning business and my dad works maintenance in a church. And so, you know, compared to friends I had who had, their parents had college degrees or master's degrees, or some of them even Ph.D. degrees. And so once I felt like I had people behind me who believed in me, that is when I slowly started to overcome that difficult, those difficult moments in which I thought that I couldn't be myself. And now I'm super comfortable with myself, and I call out anybody who thinks that I don't deserve to be here, because I do, and you do too. Despite, you know, all the things that you've had working against you, it makes you part of who you are, and it gives you perspective about, you know, who are the types of people who should be in academia and in chemistry grad programs. It's the people who, you know, have different perspectives, because you have a completely different mindset than a lot of people in academia do, and that makes you valuable. And I think that once I knew that people believed that, I started to also surrounding yourself by like good people. Like I have great friends, and I think that I overlooked that part for a long time. People who lift you up, people who are excited about your accomplishments. Yeah, I know that that's like not a like you want the answer of being like, and then I did this and now it was all over. But yeah, it did take some time, and I think that's honestly something because we've taught ourselves that we don't belong in these spaces, or we have felt because other people have pushed us out, but we do belong. And getting ourselves into those spaces can put you in positions like mine, where I love that Científico Latino has a platform to be able to bring in more underrepresented students, to make sure that we continue to fill these higher education spaces. Yeah, super, super heavy stuff, but great conversations to have. And touching base on that one, I do want to say, I hope that answered the previous question that I was keeping here about sort of navigating grad school journey. Finding people all over the place is a great start. I had one of my best friends in grad school found me on social media, had a conversation with me about the type of work that I do in terms of like outreach and leadership. And I ended up recruiting her to Minnesota, and now she sits next to me in my lab because I also recruited her to my lab. So finding people is really important. And this medium is a great place to start. If you don't know how, this is a great place to start. Awesome. Thank you for asking questions. So great. Okay. So we are going to continue unless there's anything else. Okay. So research statement or statement of purpose. So this is the part where you discuss your passion for chemistry. And so some people, and I say some people because I have read people's research statements and statements of purposes, you know, don't be overly cheesy. And what I mean by that is you don't have to say, since the moment I was born, I knew that I wanted to be a chemist. I dreamed about it. All of my building blocks when I was a kid were elements. Like you don't need to do that. But, maybe your passion for chemistry came from something completely random. Like maybe you had, this want to like understand plants, and that led you into researching something on the internet, because that's a thing that your generation was able to do, right? um, but things like that, and you can talk about what your passion is for chemistry. But the most important part, I think, of your research statement is talking about your research experiences, what you contributed to them, and what you learned from them. So, for example, I did an RU in an electrical and computer engineering department, and I was the only chemist. And so I was synthesizing nanoparticles for solar cells. And I basically taught myself everything, and I was able to do various types of characterization, and I was able to present on this. And my professor believed what I did because, she was an electrical and computer engineer. And so she had different insight and like was really excited to hear my chemistry insight. And I learned a lot about that. And I learned how to be autonomous, and I learned how to hold my own in a research place. And I talked about that. I talked about those projects where I learned, I did this, but I learned that, I'm really interested in, I don't even know what I was interested in, but whatever I was interested in the moment, I talked about that. You talk about your leadership positions, any clubs, organizations. Maybe you volunteered for a really long time with like the Special Olympics. That was something I was really passionate about when I was younger. And you can definitely talk about that. Like it doesn't necessarily have something to do with chemistry, but it was something that you care about, and it shows you as a person. And you can also mention what research you're interested in. Maybe at the school, let's talk about the University of Minnesota. You can say, I'm really interested in detecting, various types of things. And I'm interested in this professor because they do X. Like that's all you have to say. Or maybe you can say, I'm interested in these 3 professors because they, overlap in X. Talk about your future career goals. Maybe you don't want to be a professor or work in industry or a national lab or anything like that. Maybe you want to like, I don't know, maybe you're really into science communication. So maybe you can say, my future career goal, I hope to, after I finish my PhD, that I'm able to go work in science policy. Like those are all things that you can talk about. Maybe you do want to be a professor. I know I don't want to be a professor, so I'm like, but maybe you're like, yeah, I would love to be a professor at a primarily undergraduate institution. I want to teach. And so the important thing here is that you can use one big master statement for all of your applications, and then just tailor it based on what each application is asking you. And I know that Científico Latino also has some resources for you all to look at. I know that some of these are a little bit different for chemistry versus maybe like biology or public health or whatever, but having one big research statement and then changing those things and then making sure that you have people edit them is super great. So you did all of it. You took the GRE, even though only 2 of your schools needed it. You emailed professors, you submitted the letters of rec, you submitted your statement of purpose, everything. So now what? Let's say you submitted everything, I think maybe like November, end of November. So now you wait. Out of the 12 schools I applied to, I was accepted into 6. So keep in mind that rejections can happen. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but some programs may reject you not because you're not a good candidate. It just might be that you're not a right fit for that particular program, and that's okay. And maybe they did reject you because they didn't think you're a good candidate, but that's also okay. I wouldn't necessarily take it to heart, because it just means that you're one step closer to finding whatever program will be the right match for you. And knowing that, acceptances happen. Usually, I should say again, programs fly you out to visit and they want you to attend. And this is a great time to talk to graduate students and then just let them, like, you know, give you things, want you to come there. I mean, they're working hard to try to get you there. Trust me, I've taken part in a lot of recruitment weekends, and they work extra hard to try to get people to come. So if you are admitted, they really want you there. So you did it. You've been accepted. Now what do you do? So maybe now you have a bajillion questions, which is totally fair. There's a ton of questions you can ask. And there's a ton of questions that you can ask professors and graduate students. How long do the students TA for? How long does it take to graduate? How many days a week do the students work in that lab? How does funding work? How often do students go to conferences? How often do students publish? You know, those are all questions that you can ask, and you can ask as many of them as you can. And then what's really important is asking graduate students all of the questions. They will tell you the truth about advisors. They will tell you the truth about the lab teaching environment, you know, what teaching labs is like. If you have to teach a lab, you know, do you have to rotate? Like some people do rotate in labs, but not all schools do. And so knowing that is important. What are the safe neighborhoods to live in? What are the cost of living? Does it work well with the stipend that you get? I actually visited a school where I asked that question, and two grad students were like, no, the cost of living is way too high for what the stipend is. And it was honest. And then I knew. You know, do you have access to public transit? What's the easiest way to get to campus? You know, does public transit get delayed with the weather? Like, those are all things that you can ask. What do you do for fun? Like, what are things to do in the place that we live in? Or do we have access to things outside of the city? Like, all of those are great questions to ask. So we've put together, or I should say I put together some resources about chemistry programs. This was last updated last year, I think, but it might still be correct. Of all the chemistry programs that had gotten rid of the GRE. I also have a form that we do at something from my institution about what to ask professors and graduate students on grad visits, various types of fellowships. I know that, but these are ones that I think are important for chemistry, the GEM fellowship. Even if you don't finish the application, look at the GEM fellowship. I am begging you. It is an amazing fellowship. Because even if you don't get it, even if you only do half of the application, you still get access to their fee waivers, and you still get access to being a part of like a overall almost like consortium of where recruiters for those institutions reach out to students to try to recruit them at their school. And so in the end, it could be that a school that you were interested in reaches out to you. That's something that happened to me. I was really interested in a program, and that program reached out to me because of the GEM fellowship and said, hey, are you interested in our program? And I was like, oh my gosh, I am, let's talk. As well as there are some other fellowships that is on their list on the San Diego Latino website, and Pathway to Science has some great information also on applying to graduate school. I do have a question here. Will the links be available somewhere? I'm pretty sure that these slides you guys will have access to, or they'll be posted somewhere, or maybe San Diego Latino will send these links out in particular. But this was something that, yeah, you guys should be able to have access to. Maybe Jessica has more info on how that will.
Yeah, so I said in the beginning, this webinar is being recorded. We're going to upload it to our YouTube channel. In the YouTube description box, those links will be there. So
awesome. So yeah, and of course, I don't even think I put my information here, but if there is I'll put my email in the chat. If anyone has any other questions, like feel free to reach out. I am finishing soon, but I have so many contacts of people who could help you that I'd be more than happy to pass along that information. I don't know if anyone else has any last questions that they're curious about, but it sounds and it feels scary, but it is incredibly rewarding to come full circle. Like, I hope that every single one of you has the opportunity to one day tell people about how to apply to chemistry graduate programs after applying to them. What year is it? It's 2026 years ago. So I hope that you guys get that opportunity. It's very nice to be able to see more students like myself in these academic spaces. Did you apply to the NSF? I did apply to the NSF. Oh, sorry. Did you apply to the NSF GRFP before getting into university? I did. I did not get the NSF. I applied twice. I applied when I was an undergrad, and I applied my first year of grad school. I think my first year of grad school. I did not get the NSF. And that's okay. I know that Científico Latino has seminars on the best way to apply to the NSF. Also, like offline, if you would like some access to specifically some successful chemistry NSF GRFP proposals and statement of purposes, I have access to those. But yeah, I mean, apply to everything. Because even if you don't get it, like, you won't know that unless you apply. So apply to all of the things. And a lot of the times, for example, the NSF, NSDG, or NDSEG, sorry, that's a typo, SMART, a lot of those ask for similar things. So it's not like a huge time commitment to just add those things to submit those, especially because you already have letter writers who have agreed to do stuff for you. It's not hard for them because they just end up submitting the same letter and changing like a couple words for all of these applications once they write you a letter. So you should apply to every single fellowship that you can, whatever, because you won't know unless you try. And then once you're in grad school, you can also apply to things. And if you don't qualify for international students, if you don't qualify for the NSF or some of the DoD fellowships, there are going to be a ton of fellowships that will be readily available to you that might be departmental, that might be in your graduate school, that you will qualify for. So even if you can't get a fellowship in your first coming out of undergrad or in your first year of grad school, you'll still get opportunities, and you should. That's definitely a question that you can ask graduate students. What kinds of fellowships are available? When do you apply for these things? Those are also great questions to ask.
I just realized that I was unmuted the entire time, and then like my notifications went crazy. I do want to mention, Becky touched on our webinar on the NSF. We do have one coming up. It's actually, here's the link for it. Here's a link for like all of it. These are all our upcoming ones. Some are very specific to a certain field, such as this one, and some are a lot more general, such as the how to write a personal statement, which is probably the most confusing thing when I first approached it. I also linked Becky's Twitter if you want to follow her. And here is Becky's Etsy shop.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Those are all the. I also linked. Oh, sorry. I also linked our writing center, which has example statements from different fellowships, as well as different graduate school personal statements, research statements, bearing on major. And I know we have a couple for like chemistry and related fields. So if anyone wants to look at that to see how like past people wrote it, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah. And there's also like, I've quickly learned, and if you're not a social media person, that's totally okay. But I quickly learned that the chemistry Twitter community is humongous. Like, and they are constantly working to help underrepresented groups. And so if you are looking to be put in contact with someone that is of your demographic or your identity in chemistry, please let me know, because there are a ton of people who even say, like on Twitter, like, hey, I would love to edit people's NSF GRFPs, send them all to me. And if you don't know that that exists, it kind of makes it difficult to connect that to. But yeah, there's a ton of resources that you all should definitely take advantage of, because I had no idea that any of this existed when I was applying.
Yep. Okay. Any more questions are more than welcome. If not, in the chat, there's Becky's contact info in both email and social media forms. Thank you so much for attending this webinar. I thank you, Becky, for giving us first your very personal and impactful story, and all these tips to help all these future applicants, future chemistry PhD students.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping too. So thank you, Jessica, for helping host, taking the time to do this, and obviously Científico Latino for honestly being a platform, such a big impact. Honestly, I value what you guys do incredibly. And for all of you, like, please apply to chemistry. We need more of you, and if there are more of you here, then more of us will come after. So.
It seems like we don't have any more questions, and I think that wraps up everything. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm gonna stop recording, stop live streaming. Cool. All right, then.
So cool.
Oh, yeah. We have a question.
Ooh.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for coming.
All right. Okay. Well, if you don't have any more questions, make sure to send them to Becky. And we also have contact info on our own website if you have a more general question towards us. But yeah, I hope everyone has a good night or good afternoon, depending where you are, or good morning. I don't know everyone's time zones. But yeah, thank you so much, Becky, once again. And we'll see you soon, hopefully. Oh, and I hope the next time we talk, you are done with your...
Yeah, me too. All right, hopefully the world, doesn't catch on fire between now and then. So.
All right, then. Have a good one, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.